Morning settles slowly over Willow Ridge, the kind of pale winter light that never fully commits to brightness. It washes across the quiet houses lining Cedar Run Road, glinting off trimmed hedges, porch railings, and the mailboxes that all look as if they were installed within the same month. For most people here, the day begins like any other. But near the end of the block, where police cars quietly line the curb, something has shifted. The air feels tighter. The silence feels deliberate. Neighbors peek from behind curtains, unsure whether to call a friend or keep their thoughts to themselves. A few stand on their lawns, arms crossed, trying to decipher the meaning behind the officers moving briskly up the walkway of a modest brick home. The door opens slightly, and there's a sound no one had expected to hear today: the hard, unmistakable snap of metal closing around wrists. An older man stands on the threshold, his shoulders stooped, his expression unreadable beneath the trimmed white beard he's kept for years. People recognize him instantly. He's lived here long enough to blend into the yearly rhythm of church picnics and grocery store chatter. A man who nodded hello at the gas station. A man who once volunteered to help repaint the school fence. A man who was never really part of anything, yet never seemed outside of it. His name filters through the murmurs spreading along the street, but no one says it loudly. It drifts from mouth to mouth in fragments, as if people are testing the possibility that they heard wrong. Two officers step forward, taking him by the arms. He doesn't resist. The morning light touches the top of his head as he is guided down the walkway, where frost is still clinging to the grass. A woman across the street whispers to her husband that she can't imagine what could justify an arrest like this. Someone else says they saw police going through the garage. Another swears they heard talk last week about an old case being reopened. The rumors grow as quickly as the crowd. Inside the police truck waiting at the curb sits a small sealed evidence container. Through the translucent plastic, an object gleams faintly. A brass key, aged and worn, its grooves softened by time. The edges catch the weak morning sun, and for a moment, it seems to shine with an odd clarity, as if the years that buried its meaning had never passed. The key rests on a white label with a date written in faded ink. A date no one in this town has forgotten. A detective stands nearby, his coat pulled tight against the chill. He watches as the man is placed in the back of the vehicle, the door closing with a firm finality. His gaze lingers not on the suspect, but on that small container. He had opened that evidence box only weeks earlier, expecting to find nothing more than the remnants of a case older than himself. Instead, he found the thread that tugged everything loose, a preserved biological trace, overlooked by previous generations of investigators, now capable of telling a story it once could not. The detective steps inside his unmarked car, allowing himself a long, slow breath. He can almost feel the weight of the community pressing in. People are already forming opinions, stitching together memories, wondering how something so devastating could hide among them for so long. The familiarity of the suspect's face unsettles them in ways they won't fully admit. And yet, as the detective looks once more toward the evidence box on the back seat, he knows the truth didn't appear suddenly. It had been waiting, patient and unchanging, just like the key that never found the right lock. As police vehicles begin to pull away, the neighborhood slowly exhales. Front doors close, curtains fall back into place. A few neighbors linger on their lawns, unwilling to move until the last car turns the corner. They say nothing, but their silence carries the knowledge that today has altered the fabric of Willow Ridge forever. Inside the departing convoy, the man sits motionless. His eyes stay fixed ahead, never turning to look at the homes passing by. Homes he once drove past without a second thought. Homes where children grew up, where families gathered on porches during long Texas summers, where people trusted the predictable rhythm of everyday life. Now that rhythm has fractured, and the quiet that follows feels sharper, colder. Somewhere deeper in town, a woman places her morning coffee on the table and hears the news through a trembling voice on the phone. She closes her eyes as her sister speaks, and she feels something she hasn't allowed herself to feel in years, the possibility that answers might finally come. In a drawer nearby lies a spare brass key she has kept for nearly 4 decades, untouched and unaltered. She reaches for it now, pressing her thumb along its familiar ridges, and wonders if today is the beginning of the end of her waiting. The convoy turns onto the main road leading out of Willow Ridge. The detective watches the quiet houses shrinking in the rear window and thinks about how thin the line is between what a community chooses to remember and what it forces itself to forget. He knows the coming days will unearth more than evidence. They will unearth old fears, old secrets, old stories whispered behind closed doors. Yet it all began with one simple object lying in a driveway on a cold afternoon decades ago. A key without a lock, a clue without a voice, waiting for the world to catch up. To understand how this began, we go back to 1982. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe now. It helps us bring more truth to light. The quiet rhythm of Claire Halston's mornings began long before the rest of Willow Ridge stirred. On most days, she woke before sunrise, letting the soft blue of early light fill her small kitchen. She kept the same mug for years, a white ceramic cup with a faded ring of blue around the rim. As she brewed her coffee, she'd lean against the counter and look at the row of house keys hanging on small brass hooks beside the pantry door. Each key represented a different family, a different story she'd been trusted to shepherd through the process of selling or buying a home. She never said it aloud, but she saw those keys as small promises, tokens of faith from people who needed her to guide them. She lived alone, but her home never felt empty. Plants lined the windowsills, their leaves catching the morning sun. Soft music drifted from a small radio on the table. Photographs of family gatherings filled a shelf near the dining area. Claire held onto warmth wherever she found it, and she created it where it didn't exist. Her sister Linda often joked that Claire didn't decorate rooms, she softened them. At the real estate office on Magnolia Drive, she greeted her coworkers with the same steady calm that made clients trust her at first meeting. She had a gentle way of smoothing tensions, stepping into conversations with measured questions and soft humor. Younger agents often drifted to her desk for advice, sometimes under the pretense of needing help with listings, but more often because they felt steadier after talking to her. She never claimed to be a mentor, but she became one anyway. Her workspace reflected her nature. Files were sorted into neat stacks, but never rigid. A small glass bowl held peppermint candies she replenished weekly. Next to it sat her appointment planner, the cover worn at the edges from years of daily use. Claire never switched to digital scheduling. She preferred the deliberate act of writing down each address and time slot, as if the motion helped her feel the rhythm of her day. Around midday, she would take her lunch outside whenever weather allowed. She chose a quiet bench behind the office, shaded by a tall pecan tree. She'd unwrap her sandwich slowly, savoring the moment of pause between morning showings and afternoon appointments. Sometimes she'd read a few pages of the paperback she kept in her bag. Sometimes she simply watched the neighborhood around her, the distant hum of traffic, the crackle of leaves shifting in the wind, the occasional passerby waving from the sidewalk. On Fridays, she made time to visit her sister. Their conversations ranged from practical updates to nostalgic memories, drifting comfortably between laughter and silence. Linda often worried about the long hours Claire worked, but Claire brushed it aside gently. She believed in her work. She believed in helping people find a place where they could settle, grow, and build their own stories. In the evenings, she returned home with the same small ritual every night. She slipped off her shoes at the door, placed her keys in the wooden dish beside the entryway, and lit a lemon-scented candle on the kitchen counter. She cooked simple dinners, baked chicken, roasted vegetables, a slice of cornbread left over from church potluck. After cleaning up, she often settled on the sofa with her planner open on her lap, reviewing tomorrow's listings while the candle flickered gently in the dim room. The brass house key that would one day define her story hung on one of those hooks by the pantry door. It looked no different from the others, same shape, same weight, same quiet presence. But for Claire, it represented another home she was meant to show, another client she hoped to guide, another step toward helping someone build their future. She slid it into her ring the evening before the appointment, the same way she always did, without hesitation. People in Willow Ridge remembered how capable she seemed, how organized and calm. But what her closest friends saw were the small private moments that revealed her hopes. She spoke sometimes about saving enough money to buy a small piece of land outside of town, a place with space for a garden and a porch where she could drink her morning coffee in the quiet. She dreamed of planting peach trees, of living somewhere with a view of the horizon. For now, those dreams stayed tucked between the pages of her planner, in scribbled notes she added to whenever inspiration struck. Her final day began like any other. The winter sky hung low and gray, cool air drifting through the town with the promise of rain. Claire brewed her coffee, humming a tune under her breath. She checked her appointments twice, then added a final reminder for the showing scheduled that afternoon. The brass key waited in her palm for a moment as she closed her fingers around it, testing the familiar feel of its edges. She added it to her ring, clipped it to her bag, and stepped outside into the cold morning. At the office, she reviewed property details one more time. A coworker asked if she needed help with her other listings this week, and she smiled, grateful but self-assured. She told him she'd be fine, that it was just a few busy days before things slowed down again after the holiday season. They exchanged a few more words before she grabbed her bag and headed toward her car. Before leaving town, she stopped by a small cafe on the corner of Pine Street, where the owner knew her order without asking. She took her drink to go, warming her hands around the cup as she walked back to her car. She called her sister briefly before driving off, promising to stop by later in the week. Linda remembered the call clearly, Claire's voice calm, steady, full of the small optimism she carried into everything. Claire then drove past the neighborhood she knew so well, through the quiet roads edging the farmlands. The property she was scheduled to show sat on a stretch of land where the town's growth had slowed. New developments had stalled there years earlier, leaving a handful of half-renovated homes standing like markers between the old pastures and the suburbs stretching behind them. She parked neatly in the gravel driveway, checking her planner once more. She stepped out into the cold air, her breath faint against the winter breeze. She reached into her bag, pulled out the brass key, and walked toward the porch. It was the last moment anyone in town would ever see her. The winter afternoon of January 14, 1982, carried a muted stillness across the outskirts of Willow Ridge. By noon, a thin layer of cloud settled low in the Texas sky, casting a diffused gray light over the open fields and half-finished homes that dotted the outer edge of the stalled development project. The temperature had dropped through the morning, and by early afternoon, the air felt dense enough to weigh on skin. It was the kind of cold that made sounds sharper and distances seem shorter than they truly were. Claire's drive toward the property began at 1:37 p.m. Her car was seen leaving Pine Street by a local shop owner who later remembered the faint trace of steam drifting from the exhaust as she turned toward the rural roads. At 1:52 p.m., her vehicle passed a cattle fence marked with faded paint, the same one several neighbors used as a landmark when giving directions. After that, the road stretched long and quiet, broken only by patches of gravel where construction had once been planned but never completed. The house she was scheduled to show stood slightly apart from the others. It was a single-story ranch structure with an unfinished porch and a yard of scattered stones. When Claire arrived, the driveway was empty. The gravel was cold, still undisturbed. She parked neatly in the center of the cleared space, leaving enough room for a second vehicle if the prospective buyer arrived. The engine clicked softly as it cooled. She gathered her planner, the listing sheet, and the brass house key she had added to her ring the night before. At 2:03 p.m., she made a brief note in her planner, just a dash through the showing time, a habit she kept before meeting any client. Then she stepped out of the car, her shoes pressing into the gravel with a measured crunch. A faint breeze moved through the skeletal branches behind the house, carrying the smell of distant wood smoke from a farmhouse half a mile away. She walked toward the front steps, her breath briefly visible in the cold light. No one witnessed what happened next. By 2:30 p.m., a neighbor living 3 lots away noticed a vehicle parked in the driveway, but saw no movement around it. She assumed the house was being viewed and thought nothing more of it. At 3:11 p.m., a delivery driver passed by and noted the same car, still alone. He recalled later that something felt unusual about the stillness of the scene, but he continued his route. At 4:07 p.m., a second vehicle was reported by a school bus driver, dark blue or gray, older model, idling for a moment near the intersection before turning away. The sun dipped lower by late afternoon, and the shadow of the unfinished porch crawled across the gravel. Claire's car remained where she left it, untouched. The house stood silent, its windows faintly reflecting the winter light, giving no hint of what had occurred inside or near it. No one approached the property again until early evening. At 5:24 p.m., another agent from the office, concerned that Claire had not returned calls, attempted to reach her. He tried twice more over the next hour, growing uneasy as night approached. Claire was reliable to the point of habit. She always checked in. When the office closed at 6 p.m., he drove toward the development area, following the same quiet road she had taken that afternoon. When he arrived at the property, the last of the daylight had faded into a thin violet haze. The air felt colder now, brushing against the gravel with a light hiss. Claire's car sat exactly where it had been earlier, the frost beginning to gather subtly on the windshield. The interior light of the car remained off, and the driver's door was fully closed. The agent called her name once, then again, louder, stepping toward the porch. The stillness of the house responded with silence. Near the base of the steps, he noticed something unusual. Her leather portfolio lay sideways on the ground, half open, its contents listing forms. A folded map, a note of her weekly schedule stirred gently by the wind. This alone unsettled him. Claire never let her documents fall out of order. As he knelt to collect the scattered papers, he noticed the brass house key lying inches from the edge of the lowest step. It was positioned strangely, not dropped casually, but resting at an angle with one end pointing toward the driveway. Dirt clung to one side of the metal, as if it had been pressed briefly into the ground before being released. He picked it up without thinking, unaware he was holding the object that would anchor the investigation for decades. As he reached the top step and tried to peer through the front window, the dim interior gave nothing back except indistinct shapes. He called for her again. The sound hung in the air, unanswered. By 6:41 p.m., he had notified the police, and the first officers arrived slightly after 7 o'clock. Their flashlights swept across the yard, moving over the stones, the unfinished siding, and the broken-edge boards near the porch. Inside the house, the temperature felt colder than expected, and the rooms held a faint smell of dust mixed with something metallic the officers could not immediately identify. Yet there were no distinct signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken lamps, no clear disturbances. It was as if the space had swallowed whatever had happened without leaving a trace. The investigators moved outward, creating a rough perimeter around the driveway. They documented the placement of the car, noting its locked doors and the faint smudges on the trunk and handle. They examined the portfolio, now sealed into an evidence bag, and marked the place where the key had been found. They searched for footprints, but the gravel made impressions difficult to read. Only near the edge of the property did they find a partial imprint, one that seemed too shallow to give shape or size, yet too distinct to ignore. It faced away from the house, toward the open field behind the development. They found something else too, a tire impression, faint but present, marked in a patch of softer ground near the intersection, where the school bus driver had seen the second vehicle. The imprint lacked the clarity needed for immediate comparison, but it offered the first hint that Claire had not been alone that afternoon. Officers expanded their search radius, scanning the edges of the rural road with flashlights, calling her name into the darkness. The cold deepened as night took full hold. A thin wind brought with it the distant bark of a dog from a neighboring property, the only sound breaking the still, heavy quiet. At 8:52 p.m., the lead investigator paused near the base of a small cedar tree on the far side of the yard. Something caught the light, an object partially hidden beneath fallen needles. When he reached down, he found a small silver earring, its backing missing. The metal felt cold and weightless in his palm. It matched the style Claire often wore, but whether it had been lost during the showing or pulled free in a moment of struggle was impossible to determine. Inside the house, one of the officers found a faint smudge on the wall near the kitchen entryway. It could have been dirt, or it could have been something else. There were no prints clear enough to lift, no fibers distinct enough to identify. Only the soft residue of a presence that had moved through the room and left almost nothing behind. Near the back of the property, the investigators discovered a narrow indentation in the soil, as if someone had dragged something lightweight or brushed against the ground while moving toward the open field. The trail ended abruptly, swallowed by the darkness beyond the reach of their lights. By midnight, they had called in additional units. The search extended into the early hours of the morning, yet no sign of Claire appeared. The property grew colder, the frost thickening on the steps and rails. The brass key, now sealed away, became the lone tangible clue. Its placement, its slight coating of dirt, its angle on the ground, all raised questions the investigators could not yet answer. The final detail of that night came from a deputy who walked the perimeter one last time before dawn. Near the fence line, he found a thin strand of fabric caught on a splinter of wood. It was light in color, difficult to match in the weak light of his flashlight. He sealed it in an envelope, marking it as potential evidence. For years, no one could definitively say whether it belonged to Claire, the suspect, or someone else entirely. The crime scene held silence, but not emptiness. It felt as though the place itself resisted explanation, as if the unfinished house and the cold air had conspired to keep the truth buried just out of reach. The officers left at sunrise with more questions than answers, each clue pointing toward a story that refused to be told. But the oddest detail remained the key. Not just that it was found on the ground, but the peculiar angle in which it had lain slightly turned, as if meant to indicate something or someone. For decades, no one understood the significance of that small tilt in the gravel. It would take nearly 40 years for the meaning of that misplaced key to finally come to light. In the weeks following Claire Halston's disappearance, the investigation moved with an urgency that felt almost frantic. Officers worked long shifts, the local paper ran updates daily, and Willow Ridge buzzed with theories pulled from thin air. But for all the heat of the early search, the trail cooled far faster than anyone expected. What began as an all-hands effort slowly fractured into false leads, dead-end interviews, and a steady erosion of certainty. The first suspect emerged only 3 days after Claire vanished. A middle-aged man from a nearby town had been seen driving an older sedan that matched the vague description given by the school bus driver. Officers brought him in quietly, hoping for a breakthrough. He answered every question calmly, never hesitated, and even provided receipts proving he had been delivering equipment miles away that afternoon. The timeline held. The car, examined carefully, bore no resemblance to the faint tire impression found near the property. The detectives walked him out, apologizing as politely as they could. He shook their hands without bitterness, but the way he avoided their eyes left a lingering discomfort. A second lead came from an anonymous caller who claimed to have heard a scream near the development on the day Claire disappeared. Investigators canvassed the area again, walking through overgrown lots and abandoned building sites. They found nothing. When they traced the call, It led to a teenager prankster who admitted he fabricated the story to help solve the case. No charges were filed, but the detectives felt the weight of hours wasted on a lie. More interviews followed. Former clients who had been dissatisfied with Claire's professional decisions, a man she had dated briefly, and several workers from the nearby refinery who had crossed paths with her. None showed signs of guilt or inconsistencies the detectives could use. Every alibi held up. Every trail dissolved. The detectives kept returning to the house itself, hoping something had been overlooked. They re-examined the faint smudge on the wall and the earring found near the cedar tree. Neither item carried enough distinguishing detail to propel the case further. The smudge contained no recoverable fingerprints or traceable material. The earring matched the style Claire often wore, but her family couldn't confirm whether it was part of her usual pair that day. It could have been lost a week earlier or pulled free during her final moments. There was no way to know. At a community meeting held in late February, emotions ran raw. Residents filled the small auditorium at the Civic Center, whispering among themselves as detectives walked to the front. Linda Halston sat in the second row, her hands clasped tightly, her gaze fixed forward. When the lead investigator began describing the continuing efforts, a woman from the back stood and asked why more had not been done. Another demanded to know whether the department was withholding information. The detective answered each question with the same measured tone, emphasizing that they were doing everything they could. Still, the tension in the room pulsed with a frustration no amount of explanation could ease. After the meeting, a few residents approached Linda to offer condolences or awkward attempts at comfort. She responded as graciously as she could. Yet underneath the interactions, there was an unmistakable current of fear. Not fear of the truth, but fear of the unknown. The idea that someone capable of harming Claire had simply walked away undetected. By early March, the case shifted into a new phase. The media coverage began to thin. Reporters who once gathered outside the police station redirected their attention to newer stories. The initial team of detectives, exhausted and short-staffed, found themselves running in circles. Leads had become stale, witness memories blurred. The investigation entered a stretch of stagnant weeks, punctuated only by the occasional phone call from someone convinced they remembered something important. One such call came from a contractor who had worked near the development. He claimed he saw a man standing by the cedar tree around the time Claire disappeared. He described a shape more than a person: broad shoulders, dark jacket, but nothing solid enough to identify. Still, detectives brought him in to walk through his recollection. When he returned to the site, the winter frost had long melted and the scene felt foreign to him. He grew uncertain, then apologetic. Eventually he admitted he may have confused the day entirely. Months turned into the first full year. The case file thickened, its spine wearing thin as detectives added interviews, lab reports, and repeated analyses of the evidence. The brass key became a central point of discussion, but none of the experts consulted could decipher its placement. Some believed the offender had dropped it unintentionally during a struggle. Others speculated it had slipped from Claire's hand as she reached for help. One detective developed a theory that it had been deliberately placed. But without context, the idea remained speculation. The refinery workers were re-interviewed. Many had changed jobs or moved by then, scattering across the county. A few names resurfaced repeatedly: men with short tempers, men who lived alone, men with criminal histories, but nothing connected any of them directly to Claire or the property. Rumors spread, as they always do in small towns, but no amount of gossip translated into substantiated evidence. The investigation strained the detectives emotionally. Some had children the same age as Claire's nephews. Others drove past the development regularly and felt a hollow knot tighten each time. One officer admitted privately that he dreamt of the gravel driveway, imagining he could hear footsteps that never appeared. The sense of responsibility grew heavier as the months went on, pressing into the quiet hours when paperwork replaced fieldwork and hope thinned with each passing day. Claire's family endured their own kind of burden. Linda visited the station often at first. She asked thoughtful questions, brought new ideas, and tried to maintain faith in the system. But each visit ended the same way, with polite assurances that progress was being made. Slowly her visits decreased. When she did come, she carried a composure that bordered on resignation. The spare key she kept at home remained at the back of her drawer, a silent reminder that the truth had not yet come. By the third year, the case entered what investigators reluctantly called the maintenance phase. It was not closed, not formally, but no longer active in the same way. New detectives rotated through the department, each reading the thick file with fresh eyes, each concluding the same thing. Without new evidence, the case was locked in a loop. A brief spark of hope flickered in 1985 when a man from a nearby county was arrested for a separate assault. His method bore similarities, approaching women alone in isolated places, using deception to gain access, but the timeline and physical evidence clashed. He had been in another state the day Claire disappeared. Still, investigators questioned him extensively. He smirked his way through the interview, amused by their desperation. When they confirmed his alibi, the disappointment among the team was palpable. Over the next decade, the case resurfaced periodically whenever a new forensic technique emerged. In the early 90s, a detective attempted to extract more from the faint smudge on the wall, but the tests of the time yielded nothing. Later efforts to analyze fiber samples also failed to produce meaningful results. The earring was examined repeatedly, but it offered no DNA, no fingerprints, no trace of the person who had touched it. Every year on the anniversary of Claire's disappearance, the local paper printed a short recap of the case. The articles grew shorter with time, then more formulaic. Her photo appeared beside the headline each year, the same smile frozen in time. Older residents remembered her kindness. Younger ones only knew her as the woman whose story lingered without resolution. Detectives rotated off the case, carrying with them a sense of unfinished duty. One retiring officer left a note in the file. "I believe she knew her last visitor." No one knew what prompted the comment. It became one more thread woven into the tapestry of unanswered questions. By the late 90s, the case file had been moved to a less accessed cabinet, kept safe but out of immediate reach. Officers occasionally referenced it when discussing difficult cases, citing it as an example of how even thorough investigations could become paralyzed by the absence of witnesses and the silence of physical evidence. Willow Ridge changed during those years. New businesses opened, subdivisions expanded, and younger families moved in. Yet the development where Claire vanished never fully recovered. The house remained unsold for years, its exterior weathering slowly in the Texas sun. Children avoided it during games. Teenagers dared each other to approach the porch. Adults passed by with quiet discomfort. Eventually, the department added a final note to the file for that period. No further viable leads at this time. It was not a declaration of defeat, but it carried the weight of one. The case was not forgotten, but it had exhausted everyone who touched it. The last sentence of the internal memo captured the quiet collapse of the investigation. File to remain open, pending new evidence. And for nearly 4 decades, no new evidence came. The years that followed Claire's disappearance moved slowly at first, then all at once. Time has a way of folding in on itself during grief, stretching moments of waiting into what feels like lifetimes. For Linda Halston, Claire's older sister, the world changed in subtle increments, seasons shifting, photos fading, the town evolving, while one truth refused to move at all. Her sister was gone, and no one could tell her why. Linda kept the spare brass key in the top drawer of her knitstand. For the first few years, she held it every night before she slept, running her thumb along the ridges until she knew them by heart. It had once been a harmless object, part of a set of keys Claire gave her, just in case. Now it felt like the only tangible connection to a moment neither of them had understood in time. She never used it after Claire vanished, but she couldn't bring herself to hide it away either. It rested in the drawer like a quiet witness, its meaning unresolved. Through the 80s, Linda wrote letters addressed to her sister, though she never mailed them. She kept them in a shoebox lined with tissue paper short notes about family gatherings, about the peach cobbler recipe she had finally perfected, about the new garden she planted in Claire's honor. Some letters unfolded into longer confessions, revealing fears she couldn't share with anyone else. They were her attempt to speak into the silence that had swallowed her sister's life. As the decade closed, Willow Ridge expanded. A new shopping center opened on the West End. Children who once played in quiet yards grew into teenagers with louder opinions and louder music. The real estate office where Claire had worked hired new agents, each trying to learn the rhythm of the town. Her desk was cleared, the drawer emptied, the chair rolled to someone else's station. Only the paint on the wall behind it, slightly darker from years of shielding, remembered she had once been there. Detectives changed, too. Officers retired. Younger ones joined. Every so often, someone revisited the file, leafing through pages yellowed with age. They rarely found anything new. The handwriting in the margins, the grainy photographs, the faded labels on evidence bags, these were artifacts from an era before their time. They read the notes carefully, sometimes twice, and always closed the file with the same heavy pause. In 1992, on the 10th anniversary of Claire's disappearance, the local paper interviewed Linda. The reporter asked gentle questions that stirred difficult memories. Linda spoke softly, choosing her words the way people choose fragile objects. She described Claire's warmth, her dedication to her community, her habit of leaving handwritten notes on front doors when clients couldn't be reached. The article ran on the third page, accompanied by Claire's photo. For a brief week, people in town remembered again. They spoke about her at grocery stores, at baseball games, at Sunday service. Then the conversation faded once more into the rhythm of everyday life. As the 90s progressed, Linda's hair began to show strands of gray. She married, then divorced quietly, keeping her last name so she wouldn't feel further untethered from her sister. She moved houses twice but always packed the shoebox of letters herself, placing it gently on the passenger seat as if it were a traveling companion. The brass key traveled too, wrapped in a small cloth pouch, always within reach. Willow Ridge continued to grow. New families arrived, unaware of the stories that once kept the town awake at night. Older residents who remembered Claire vividly felt the shape of that memory shifting. It became more fragile, more distant, yet no less painful. The development where she vanished remained stagnant, half claimed by weeds and dust, a place people avoided without needing to articulate why. Children invented ghost stories about it. Adults simply chose different routes whenever possible. In the early 2000s, Linda found an old recorder with messages Claire had left on her answering machine. The tapes had degraded, warping the sound slightly, but her voice was unmistakable, warm, grounded, purposeful. Linda played the recordings once every few years, as if rationing the sound. Each playback tightened her chest, but she could not erase them. They were the closest she had to hearing Claire as she had been. Around the same time, advances in forensic science began filtering into everyday conversations. People heard about breakthroughs on the news cases solved by new testing, by databases, by technologies that did not exist when Claire vanished. Linda followed these developments quietly, reading news articles late at night. She began to wonder whether the traces Claire left behind, whatever they might be, had held onto more truth than investigators once believed. She contacted the department several times in those years. Each time, she spoke with a different detective. Some sounded hopeful, others apologetic, all constrained by the limitations of the evidence they had. They assured her the file remained open. They encouraged her to hold on to faith. But every conversation ended the same way, with a promise that time could not yet fulfill. The town itself changed in ways that made it almost unrecognizable to newcomers. Wide roads were expanded. New parks were built. Old storefronts were renovated into modern businesses. Yet the house where Claire was last seen remained vacant for years, its boards warping under the sun. Eventually, the structure was demolished, leaving a concrete foundation and a scatter of debris that settlers avoided long after. Even in absence, the place retained its unease. By the 2010s, Linda had grown older, her hands lined with the passages of time. Yet her dedication to Claire never wavered. On the anniversary each year, she brought a small bouquet to a tree planted in memory of her sister at the edge of town. She tied a thin ribbon to one of the branches, a quiet testament to a promise she refused to abandon. Some years, a few neighbors joined her. Other years, she stood alone. But the ritual grounded her. It reminded her that memory was not a passive act. It was a decision renewed each day. As the digital age expanded, the ways people remembered and searched for truth changed. Online forums sprouted, discussing old cases in obsessive detail. Volunteers analyzed files, built timelines, traced forgotten leads. A podcast about unsolved crimes mentioned Claire's case briefly, noting the curious detail of the brass key and its angle on the ground. A stranger from another state sent Linda a message offering sympathy. She accepted it with gratitude, though it reminded her how far Claire's story had drifted from the people who once knew her best. In late 2017, the Willow Ridge Police Department began a small initiative to reassess older cases. A new detective, only in his early 40s, took a special interest in the files that had been transferred from cabinet to cabinet for decades. He read Claire's file quietly, absorbing the details that had baffled generations before him. He noticed the careful documentation, the timeline notes, the smudge on the wall, the faint fabric strand. But his attention settled most intensely on the biological sample preserved from the original scene, collected with rudimentary tools, stored with fading labels, yet untouched in the freezer. He wondered what modern methods might reveal that earlier science could not. In the spring of 2018, Linda received a call. The new detective introduced himself gently, aware of the weight his words carried. He told her that the department intended to retest the evidence using updated technology, part of a broader review of old cases. His tone was cautious but sincere. Linda listened with a stillness she hadn't known she possessed. After the call ended, she opened her nightstand drawer and held the brass key once again, pressing it between her palms until the cool metal warmed against her skin. That evening, she walked to her porch and sat in the fading light, letting herself imagine, for the first time in years, that an answer might finally be possible. Not guaranteed. Not promised, but possible. It was the first true spark of hope she had felt in decades. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop an emoji in the comments. The evidence room where old cases were stored had a quality of stillness that felt almost ceremonial. Rows of labeled boxes sat on metal shelves, each one holding fragments of stories that had never reached their final chapter. When the detective pulled Claire Halston's file from the shelf in early 2018, he didn't expect more than a few hours of review. He had done this with dozens of cases. Read the reports, re-examine the photos, consider whether modern tools might reveal something the original investigators couldn't see. But as he opened the lid and lifted the contents gently onto the table, something in the weight of the file made him pause. The biological sample, collected from the property on the night Claire vanished, had been stored carefully, wrapped in archival packaging that preserved its integrity despite the decades. It was a trace amount, barely enough to be tested even by contemporary standards. Earlier attempts had yielded nothing. But science had changed, and new methods relied on smaller, more degraded samples. The detective held the container up to the light, turning it slowly, as if the clarity of what lay inside might depend on the angle. He filled out the request forms meticulously, citing advances in genealogical mapping as justification for reanalysis. The lab accepted the sample with cautious optimism, knowing that decades-old material often disappointed. Still, the The technician handling the evidence spoke with quiet excitement, aware that the slightest breakthrough could untangle a case frozen almost beyond memory. The testing process stretched across weeks. Technicians began by extracting what remained of the biological material, coaxing each molecule through a series of increasingly sensitive stages. Machines hummed steadily, scanning patterns that seemed at first too faint to interpret. The early runs produced partial profiles, fragments of genetic information that hinted at possibility, but lacked the completeness required for instant matches. Slowly, with repeated refinement, the fragments formed a coherent signal. The lab generated a DNA profile that, while not perfect, carried enough structure to be compared against databases built through years of genealogical research. It didn't match any offender in criminal records, but in the rapidly evolving world of forensic genealogy, that was not a dead end, it was only step one. The detective watched as the genealogist assigned to the case began mapping out distant relatives connected to the sample. She examined names collected from public records, census data, family trees uploaded to genealogy websites, and decades of archive documentation. The early outlines of the digital tree branched outward from a handful of second and third cousins whose data had been voluntarily shared. Each branch became a possibility, each surname a clue. The tree grew slowly, carefully. The genealogist cross-referenced ages, locations, marriages, divorces, and obituaries. She highlighted individuals who had lived near Willow Ridge during the early 1980s, marking them one by one. Then she began eliminating branches that didn't fit the parameters, families that had moved away years before. Claire vanished individuals too old or too young to align with the timeline, people with no conceivable connection to the property. One branch remained stubbornly consistent. A Texas family line traced through generations of ranch workers and refinery laborers. The genealogist leaned closer, narrowing her list. One name surfaced with unsettling precision. A man who had lived less than 10 miles from the property at the time of Claire's disappearance. A man who worked a rotating shift at a refinery where investigators had once conducted interviews, though he himself had never been questioned. A man whose records showed he'd lived a transient life afterward, never staying long in one place. His name was Randall Mercer. The detective felt a shift inside him as he reviewed the genealogist's notes. There were no guarantees yet, but the alignment was undeniable. Mercer fit the age range, the geography, and the family connections identified through the DNA. The genealogist estimated the probability of connection as extremely high. Still, procedure demanded caution. More testing followed, each step drawing the noose of probability tighter. The detective traveled to Mercer's home in a neighboring town, driving through early morning fog that clung to the windshield. He parked far enough away not to draw attention and watched the man step outside to collect his mail. Mercer moved with the slow assurance of someone who believed his life was ordinary. His hair had thinned. His shoulders had rounded with age. He returned inside without noticing anything unusual. But for the detective, the sight of Mercer breathing the same crisp morning air felt like witnessing a page turn in a story long stalled. A team began surveillance. Days stretched into weeks as they waited for the opportunity to collect a discarded sample, a coffee cup, a cigarette butt, anything Mercer left behind. When the moment finally came, the detectives handled it with the same reverence given to the original evidence. They sent it to the lab immediately. The results arrived days later, crisp and undeniable. The DNA taken from Mercer's discarded item matched the profile extracted from the evidence collected in 1982, not partially, not vaguely. A direct, statistically overwhelming match. The detective sat still as he read the report, letting the significance settle into his bones. He thought of the brass key found at the base of the steps, the slight tilt that puzzled investigators for decades. He thought of the earring discovered beneath the cedar tree, the faint smudge on the kitchen wall. He thought of the gravel driveway, of the winter air, of the silence that had held the truth hostage. Now at last, Something had cracked through that silence. The team prepared the arrest warrant with meticulous care. They reviewed every detail, aware of the scrutiny that awaited them. The district attorney signed the paperwork. Officers assembled quietly at dawn, their breath visible in the cold morning light. Before the arrest, the detective called Linda. She answered on the second ring, her voice steady yet fragile. When he told her they had identified a suspect, there was a pause long enough to stretch across the years she had waited. She didn't cry. She inhaled deeply, as if the air around her had shifted in temperature. She asked only one question, whether the evidence was strong. The detective told her the truth. It was stronger than anything they had ever had. When officers placed Mercer in handcuffs days later, the detective felt no triumph, only a solemn recognition of the moment's weight. The decades had changed everything around the case except the core truth that now revealed itself. Mercer lowered his head as they escorted him to the vehicle. He said nothing. Yet in his silence, there was an unmistakable acknowledgement, one that the detective recognized instantly. News spread quickly through Willow Ridge. People who had forgotten the details of the case remembered abruptly. Those who had been children when Claire vanished were now adults, speaking about how the arrest reframed their understanding of the community they grew up in. Some expressed disbelief. Others felt relief. Many felt something in between. Linda sat alone in her living room when the detective called a second time, this one to confirm the charges. She held the brass key in her hand, its edges worn smooth from decades of worry. For years, the key had symbolized a locked door she could not open. Now, as she closed her fingers around it, she felt the smallest shift inside herself, as though the door had finally begun to give way. Hit the like button if you believe justice always finds its way. The morning of the arrest carried a quiet chill, the kind that settles into the spaces between breath and thought. Officers gathered outside the small brick house where Randall Mercer had lived for years, blending into the routines of a neighborhood that barely noticed him. When he opened the door, his eyes flicked across the group of officers, and for a brief second, there was a strange stillness in his posture, as though a life he had kept sealed away had finally reached its limit. He didn't protest. He didn't ask why they were there. The handcuffs clicked shut with the finality of a truth long overdue. Neighbors stepped out in robes and slippers, whispering to one another, watching the man they once greeted with polite nods being led to the waiting vehicle. The detective who had revived the case watched Mercer's face carefully, searching for a sign of recognition or regret. But the expression remained unreadable, fixed somewhere between resignation and exhaustion. Word of the arrest spread across Willow Ridge before noon. People revisited old conversations, old suspicions, old fears that once hovered beneath polite daily life. Some felt vindicated. Others were stunned. Many were shaken by the idea that the man who now sat in the back of a police cruiser had once walked freely among them, unremarkable yet harboring a truth that had stolen an entire future. During the initial questioning, Mercer kept to short answers. He denied involvement, then shifted to vague recollections that contradicted earlier statements. He claimed not to remember Claire, not to recall ever touring a property with her. Each denial felt thin, worn down by the weight of years. Investigators remained steady, letting the evidence speak for itself. When confronted with the DNA results, Mercer grew still. His hands tightened slightly, but he said nothing, as though silence might undo what science had made undeniable. The district attorney moved swiftly. Charges were filed, and the community braced itself for a trial they had once believed would never come. In the months that followed, the courthouse became a focal point of long-dormant conversations about safety, trust, justice, and the quiet ways people learn to carry unresolved grief. On the day of the preliminary hearing, the courtroom filled early. Wooden benches held neighbors, reporters, retired officers, and people who had only heard fragments of the story but felt compelled to bear witness. The air felt heavy with unspoken anticipation. Linda walked into the room with measured steps, her hands folded in front of her, the brass key tucked safely inside her purse. She took a seat near the front, her gaze level and unwavering. When Mercer entered, escorted by deputies, he avoided looking toward the gallery. His expression remained muted, but something flickered across his face when he noticed the detective who had revived the case. Perhaps recognition, perhaps resentment. Whatever it was, it did not last long. The prosecutor laid out the foundation of the case with methodical clarity. The DNA match, the genealogical tracing, the narrowed suspect pool, the proximity of Mercer's past employment to the property, the gaps in his timeline, the evidence that had lain dormant until the modern world finally caught up with it. The courtroom absorbed each detail with a growing sense of inevitability. The defense attempted to cast doubt, focusing on the age of the evidence, the gaps in the original investigation, the absence of eyewitnesses. They argued that memory fades, that stories distort, that time erodes the certainty needed for conviction. But the heart of the case did not rest on memory. It rested on strands of truth so small they were almost invisible molecules of identity preserved across decades, pointing with unwavering precision toward a single man. When the trial formally began months later, the courtroom's atmosphere shifted. The lighting felt sharper, the rows of benches more rigid. Linda attended every session, her presence steady but not intrusive. She didn't seek comfort from the people around her. Instead, she offered a quiet strength to those who acknowledged her loss with a nod or a whispered word. Witnesses testified, officers who had first arrived at the scene, technicians who had handled the evidence, genealogists who explained how family trees could reveal hidden connections. Their words built the structure of a story that had once seemed impossible to complete. The earring discovered beneath the cedar tree resurfaced in testimony. Though it could not be conclusively tied to Claire, its presence contributed to the understanding that she had not left the property willingly. The smudge on the kitchen wall, the partial tire track, the unusual angle of the brass key, all were pieces in a puzzle that had remained stubbornly unresolved, until science brought a missing corner into focus. When the prosecution rested, the courtroom felt wrapped in an almost tangible quiet. The defense offered alternative theories, none of them strong enough to counter the precision of the forensic match. Mercer himself never took the stand. He chose silence instead, sitting motionless as the trial moved toward its inevitable conclusion. In closing arguments, the prosecutor spoke with calm conviction. She reminded the jury that justice is not always swift, that truth sometimes waits in the shadows for decades before emerging. She asked them to consider the life Claire had lost, the years her family had spent carrying uncertainty, and the opportunity before them to close a wound that had never truly healed. The jury deliberated for less time than many expected. When they returned, their expressions revealed everything before a single word was spoken. Mercer watched them file in, his gaze fixed on a point just above their heads, as if he were already bracing for the sentence that followed. Guilty. The word echoed softly through the room, absorbed by the wooden walls, the benches, the air itself. Mercer's shoulders sagged slightly, though his face remained unchanged. The judge read the sentence, and the courtroom exhaled a long breath it had held for nearly 40 years. Linda closed her eyes. She didn't cry. Instead, she allowed the moment to settle into her in a way that felt both grounding and surreal. After the court adjourned, she stepped outside, letting the cool air wash over her. The detective approached quietly, offering a gentle nod. Neither spoke at first. Words felt unnecessary. When Linda finally reached into her purse and wrapped her fingers around the brass key, it felt different than it ever had before. It no longer represented a locked door or a lingering question. It had become something else, an inheritance of truth, an acknowledgement of a story completed, a symbol of strength carried through decades of silence. Justice had not restored what was lost, but it had brought an ending shaped not by absence, but by the courage of those who refused to forget. In the months after the verdict, Willow Ridge settled into a quieter rhythm. The tension that had stretched across the town for decades eased in ways most people hadn't expected. Conversations that once circled cautiously around the memory of Claire Halston now carried a different tone, not the sharp sting of uncertainty, but the softer weight of acknowledgement. People spoke her name more freely, as if bringing her story into the open allowed them to reclaim a part of their own history. Linda moved through these days with a gentler steadiness. The edges of grief remained, but they no longer defined her. Instead, she found herself drawn to small rituals that connected the past and present without reopening old wounds. She tended to the tree planted in her sister's memory, pruning its branches, brushing fallen leaves from its base. Each season brought new colors, new growth, reminders that life had continued even when hope felt suspended. One evening, she returned home to find the sunset casting a warm glow through her kitchen window. She opened the drawer beside her bed, the one that had held the brass key for nearly 40 years. When she lifted it this time, the metal felt lighter than she remembered. Its weight had not changed, but its meaning had. It no longer symbolized a door that refused to open. It had become a testament to the persistence of memory, to the slow but steady pursuit of truth, to the love that refused to fade even when answers seemed unreachable. She placed the key inside a small wooden box and set it on the shelf beside her sister's photograph. The gesture was simple, but it carried the quiet power of resolution. It was time for the key to rest. For the detective, the case left a lasting mark as well. He continued his work with the Cold Case Initiative, but something about Claire's file stayed with him. It had reminded him that justice is not only the act of solving a crime. It is the act of refusing to let a life disappear into silence. He thought often about the people who had carried the burden long before he ever opened the box in the evidence room. Their persistence had kept the story alive until science could catch up. The town evolved, as towns do. New homes rose on the outskirts. Old roads were repaved. Children grew into adults who learned about Claire's case through their parents' recollections, or through the news of the arrest. The unfinished development where she vanished was eventually reclaimed for new construction, though the land still seemed to hold the memory of winter light and quiet gravel. People in Willow Ridge did not forget. They simply learned to hold the story differently. On the next anniversary of her disappearance, Linda stood quietly beneath the tree dedicated to her sister. A soft breeze moved through the leaves, carrying the scent of early spring. She placed a single white flower at the base of the trunk and rested her hand gently against the bark. There was no longer a sense of reaching for something lost. Instead, she felt a tender closeness, as though time had brought her sister nearer in a way grief never allowed. The lesson of Claire's story extended beyond her family. It lived in the understanding that justice does not always arrive when it's needed, but arrives when those seeking it refuse to turn away. It lived in the knowledge that truth can survive years of silence. It lived in the community learning to see one another with deeper care, recognizing that darkness sometimes hides in plain sight, but so does resilience. As the sun dipped lower and shadows lengthened across Willow Ridge, Linda stepped back from the tree and let the quiet settle. The air felt full, not with sorrow, but with a gentle sense of completion. She walked home slowly, carrying the calm assurance that her sister's story had finally found its end, not in darkness, but in light. Which case should we tell next? Leave your suggestion below.